Hi everyone, I'm Bijan from PM Exercises, and today we have Halim Madi, one of the users of PM Exercises who recently landed a few offers from top tech companies in the Bay Area. He's also joining us as a PM interview coach at PM Exercises. We're going to do a mock interview together, but before I get started, Halim, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself?
Yeah, thanks, Bijan. My name's Halim. I'm currently a product manager at Facebook. I've worked on profile, virtual reality, and currently I work on Facebook Marketplace. Previously, I was a founder. One of my companies got acquired in London, and my second company is still around. I act as an advisor. And I'm really excited to be here, really grateful for the community and everything you've put together, Bijan.
Thank you very much, really appreciate it. And for those of you that are watching this video, I'd like to invite you to check out our YouTube channel, subscribe to our YouTube channel so you're informed every time there's a new video being uploaded to YouTube. And I'd like to also invite you to like this video so that other people can find out about this YouTube video and hopefully benefit from it. First, we're going to ask Halim what his experience was with preparing for the PM interviews, what kind of process he went through. Then we'll do a mock interview. And then after that, we'll ask for his advice on what's the best way to prep for an interview. So with that said, Halim, it'd be great if you can kind of share your experience on your journey so far and like how you went about preparing for your PM interviews and what the outcome has been.
Yeah. So I started about 3.5 months ago, and it started by a clear decision that I was ready for my next adventure. Once that was clear, I spent a couple of months casually preparing. So reviewing everything I had used for my Facebook interview back in the time, but also reading a lot. The Andreessen Horowitz blog, Stratechery, TechCrunch a lot as well, really creating an opinion around a lot of the technology and the innovations that are happening right now. And I think that was important to get a grasp of what is happening and develop my strategic thinking again. And in parallel, I was also reflecting on my last 4 years at Facebook. I think that's important for all the behavioral interviews and the leadership and drive type questions. It helped me a lot as well in thinking about what I had accomplished, the conflicts I had been through, how I went through them. And so a lot of self-reflection and introspection that really became the base of how I would answer my questions. And also just an amazing opportunity to stop and think about the last 4 years for myself. In the last months before the interviews, I went into serious mode, preparing 1 hour to 2 hours a day, making sure I was doing a mock interview every day, also working with a coach, and eventually going through all of the interviews. I think if I were to give a piece of advice to everyone listening, there is a point where I became very conscious that I was relying too much on frameworks or strategies or tactics, and it became almost like a challenge for myself to liberate myself or go beyond these. So know them so well that I could improvise on my own, that I could truly, that they would just become a framework for me to actually put forth my actual thinking and my skills and my added value. So that was an important shift for me towards the end.
That's really helpful. And curious to know how much time it took you, on a daily basis to really prep. And you mentioned you did mock interviews and you looked at some of the frameworks. I'm curious to know, what tools you use and what were some of the resources that helped you prep for the interview as well.
Yeah, I have all the books, Decode and Conquer, Cracking, etc. And then the product management exercises was super helpful. I think the way the lessons are structured was super important. There are also in the discuss forums, there are some answers that are so well structured that in and by themselves actually were such a great example to follow. Reading on Quora actually, just the almost inside information about companies was very helpful for me. And yeah, these were important. This is on the tools side. When it comes to time investment, I think a minimum of 2 hours a day was what I was putting in, and also working weekends. There was definitely some sacrifice in regard to my partnership and etc. Yeah, but so that's something to keep in mind actually when going into the space.
That makes sense. I mean, the one thing that I tell people is that when you're applying for a PM job at a top tech company, you're really competing against the cream of the crop around the globe. And so you're really competing against the best. So you should just do your homework, make sure that you're really prepared, you feel very confident before you walk into that interview and give yourself a chance. So thank you for that. Really appreciate it. I think we can get started with the interview question. I'm very excited about it. It's a pretty tricky one, but I love to see how you go about answering it. And the interview question is, as a PM of YouTube, how would you position YouTube against Instagram and Snapchat? And for those of you that are just joining to watch our video, I'd like to invite you to like this video so that other product managers in the community can become aware of it. Join our YouTube channel. Feel free to subscribe to our channel. And if you're preparing for your PM interview, make sure to visit our website, productmanagementexercises.com, where over 30,000 community members are helping each other prepare for their PM interviews at top tech companies around the globe.
I do have some questions actually, or rather some assumptions that I'll put in place and make sure we agree on them before we jump in.
Sure.
Again, the question is, as a PM of YouTube, how would I position YouTube against Instagram and Snapchat? And I want to be clear about that, as in when we talk about Instagram and Snapchat specifically, we are talking about these are, these two products do a lot of things. And so I'm going to specifically focus on the short video format for these two platforms, because that I consider is the biggest threat to YouTube. And I'll double click into that. There are other aspects, social aspects, for instance, that we'll keep in mind as well, but this is definitely like the zone I'm going to play into. How does that sound?
Yeah, sounds good.
Cool, great, awesome. So one thing I suggest actually, Bijan, which I've done in the interviews I've been in, is that I've shared my screen and almost used this as a whiteboard. How does that sound?
Yeah, sounds good, let's do it.
So the way I would love to go through this is to think first about YouTube. And when thinking about YouTube, one has to start with Google itself, thinking about the mission and the goal, like really from a quantitative perspective and a qualitative perspective as well. I think once that's covered, I'll just use Porter's 5 forces loosely to think about all the dimensions that we're dealing with here. And what I would love to get to actually together is almost a table. And again, this is still loose, but I'd say the framework I'd like us to start plugging all of the ideas that are going to come up into is something along these lines. So YouTube and Snapchat here, and then the strength and weaknesses of each of these platforms, and especially how we compare them to each other's. Because I do believe that with something like this, we'll be able to put in place a strategy that will help us position YouTube against these two. Cool. And then, we'll finish with things like, what is the plan that we would like to put in place? What are the risks as well? And how would we define success? Great. So let me talk through each of these points. Let's start with the top one. First of all, Google's mission is to organize the world's information in a way that is accessible and useful for everyone. And each of these words is so important and crystallizes that mission, as in it's everyone, as in YouTube truly is a way to organize, fits into that mission so clearly and so well, in that it organizes video format information for everyone around the globe. Can you hear me, Bijan?
Yes, I can hear you. Yeah.
Great. And so YouTube is also now has YouTube Red and organizes music as well. So that's a dimension to keep in mind, but I'll focus mainly on video today, especially because we are talking about Snapchat and Instagram. And so in that sense, YouTube is a marketplace. And it doesn't only have it's not only a two-sided marketplace, but a three-sided marketplace, right? Where we have effectively three actors, or stakeholders. One are the viewers, second are the creators, and third, the advertisers. And when we think about YouTube itself, and really the big innovation it's done is that YouTube introduced the the ease of sharing videos. It became so easy to just copy a URL and share it to anyone. Before that, it was a whole hassle to just be able to access video and share it. And I think the niche that, not the niche that's become really now a mainstream use case that YouTube captured was truly the medium to long format video. And so I'm talking about, anywhere from 4 minutes to all the way to, 15 minutes. This is really where YouTube shines. And the two verticals that it truly conquered are education and entertainment. And that kind of captures where YouTube sits today and how it's doing. If I were to talk about its goal from a quantitative perspective, what YouTube is trying to accomplish now is depth of engagement. So things like YouTube Red, basically, when we look at that strategy and trying to get creators to create custom content for YouTube, YouTube is really going into like Amazon ground and Netflix ground, trying to create something that's unique to YouTube to get more people in. And so it is like about unique content, and also that's one of the strategies YouTube Red is going after. And so from a quant perspective, I would say like engagement, specifically depth of engagement, is important. And that translates to be specific into time spent on YouTube in general, but also into the number of, this is for viewers, number of maybe playlists, likes, comments, shares, etc. Like how, are they simply watching videos passively, or are they truly engaging with all of that content? And from a creator's perspective, I do think it's still like the number of videos, the retention in general, meaning like week on week, how many creators do we have? Great. This is good because it gives us context for the next step, which is the Sporters by Forces. So thinking a bit about competition, I think this table will be useful. If I think about Snapchat and Instagram, their strength really lies in a single word that would be like the social graph. As in, sure, YouTube has a lot of people using YouTube, but the connections between these people is very loose. There is, almost no connection. And that means that when I watch something on YouTube, I am much more likely to share it on other platforms than YouTube. I will never share it with, Bijan's YouTube profile. I'd rather share it with, Bijan's Instagram profile. And so the fact that we don't understand how our users are connected is a weakness, actually. So lack of social graph in a way, is one of YouTube's weaknesses. We don't know, almost like I don't like the word blindness, but just for the sake of this, or rather, we don't know how people are connected. How people are connected. Also on this trend for Snapchat and Instagram, I do think because of the social graph, basically the recommendations are off the charts compared to YouTube. So YouTube's recommendations might be good, and they use collaborative filtering to do all that, but again, they lack the intelligence of the social graph. And so recommendations are much better on Snapchat. So thanks to the social graph. Some of YouTube, I'm jumping around here between these 4 cases, but slowly building this case to better understand how we go forward. If I were to think about YouTube's strength, I do think like Google itself is one of YouTube's strength. As in, if I think about the Google universe, we have Assistant, we have deep machine learning models that can truly understand our users' needs and preferences. I can think about Photos. There's a Drive as well. Gmail as only actually Photos and Gmail are kind of the only 2 social products we have out there where we have like a semblance of a social graph happening. So these are 2 I would want to keep in mind when I think about the strength. YouTube is also like, the library of the video library of the web. So there's like this exhaustive aspect that these other platforms don't have. There's also the fact that it's older, meaning all creators have their own libraries on YouTube, right? And they've created that. And so that in that sense, there is an advantage to that, and how to leverage that would be important. I think YouTube also has relationships with brands, also, older relationships with brands and creators. That's not a great one, honestly. I do think it's shared with Snapchat and Instagram. It's not a really big differentiator. Let's see, thinking more through strengths of Snapchat and Instagram. So it does appeal, there's an appeal to millennials. And I say this loosely, but there's like the formats, just like for new formats. So there's an appeal to new creators and to the long tail of creators. So that creation is much easier as well. So it's almost like Snapchat and Instagram are appealing to a new segment of viewers, and also to a new segment of creators that YouTube is not accessing efficiently enough. From a weakness perspective, however, for Snapchat and Instagram, things that come to mind. I mean, if I think about Snapchat, the fact there's almost like their strengths are also their weaknesses, because they appeal to so few. A lot of people don't actually access them and don't have the literacy to understand the full spectrum of them. And so there's Snapchat. So Snapchat is inaccessible to most, just because the UI is really designed for a few. And because the social network is really for targeted at younger people. And IG there's so much happening. So it's like the complexity of use cases. There's too much for people to really know and actually discover what they want. Whereas YouTube is so straightforward. In this case, like UX is familiar, and it's a known experience from that perspective. Looking at that, I'm going to pause for a second. Some more might come up, but what I would do is already like, I would want to hammer our competitors' weaknesses. I would want to minimize our own weaknesses. I would want to also almost co-opt, so not copy, but get inspiration from these, and then double down on our strengths. How can we leverage our strengths? Okay. And with all that in mind, I think I would love to focus for a second on customers and really like pause, having seen all of that and really understanding the use cases that are happening today. If I were to focus, again, in the context of these Porter's 5 forces. So if I were to focus on customers for a second, I know that there's Snapchat and Instagram, but there's also TikTok. Entertainment has basically changed. Customer behavior has gone from, sitting down and watching a video for a long time to, or even watching TV, right? Because the third column here is actually TV, the one that everyone is competing against. And so TV has basically been put aside by things like Snapchat, Instagram, and TikTok. And these, whereas before YouTube was starting to eat at TV's share, now these platforms have conquered almost like these idle small moments that we have in our days, right? And so it's almost as if I were to think about customers' time, we have either like small idle moments, or we have long watch time. So these are like dinner time, etc. And this is where Netflix comes in. Or we have, an intentional, watch time, which is where YouTube kind of shines, right? We go to YouTube to do something specifically, like to find an education video or some entertainment video. So that's one thing that is coming to mind. Another one is that there is, from a customer perspective, like there is a confusion today. Personally, when I think about videos and video watching, I don't know where to find what. And so there isn't like a single holistic library for everything. And by that, I mean, I want to find all the movies I want to watch, but also all the entertainers and creators. And so lack of a single holistic library. Cool. And looking at all of that, I can already, start seeing like a few things crystallizing. And that's where the plan comes in. So it's almost like a few ideas. And I can already insert, let's see, a mini table of sorts. I think this could be, maybe columns. And we can just put a few ideas that come up here, and then maybe evaluate them as we go and think through them. Maybe like actually insert content right, almost like a pro and con. each of these ideas. So what could YouTube do? If you look at this, doubling down on our strengths in a way that really, puts Snapchat and Instagram aside, there's, the idea that we can leverage. Actually, I'm going to take a minute more to just think through this one. I do think this is the key here.
For those of you that are joining to watch this video, if you're preparing for your PM interviews, please make sure to check out our website, productmanagementexercises.com, where you can meet other product managers or aspiring product managers who are preparing for their PM job interviews and practice with them.
A few ideas that have come here. Again, we started all of this with the question of how do we position YouTube as the PM of YouTube? How would I position YouTube against Snapchat and Instagram? Yeah. And grounding all of this in our mission that YouTube is here to organize the world's information, video information specifically, and to become a marketplace that truly unlocks creators' creativity and then gives all viewers access to that creativity. And if I am to look at everything we discovered here, the big one here is that YouTube is very weak at at short format, right? Snapchat and Instagram short format. And I know there's a YouTube stories of sorts that we've started, but that hasn't really taken off. So that's one thing to keep in mind, right? The other part is that we are we are both very exhaustive. So we have a very exhaustive library. We also have models that can understand users. So Google ML models and assistants. On this front, we have a lack of social graph that we understand very well, and that our competitors are basically complex. And so the plan and the thesis that is starting to form here is the following, based on these principles: make video consumption easier for users for all use cases time availability. In other terms, whether it's for small idle moments or long watch time or intentional watch time, we need to be able, with all of these ML models and these programmings that we have, to target all of these. And so one idea that comes up is intelligent programming, right? And intelligent programming means, it's a better understanding of what viewers need when. And so it's almost like, do you have 5 minutes or 10 minutes or 30 minutes or 50 seconds? And YouTube would basically have something for you in all of these cases, right? So that's one approach. The other approach for creators is that something like that, intelligent programming, would allow creators of all formats and all kinds, etc., to actually get more ads. YouTube is much stronger when it comes to advertisement and remunerating creators than both of these platforms, Snapchat and Instagram. And so we can truly, help creators in that sense. There's also kind of a, here, this is a far out idea, but today creators on these platforms, on Snapchat and Instagram, sometimes work for free, really, right? So rarely are remunerated. And what Google could do is introduce a, almost like a NFT type of format where everything you create is actually owned by you and is somehow, purchasable by others. And I know Google has the innovative power to launch something like this, but also maybe a tokenization or a social tokenization of these creators to incentivize their viewers to actually be there and help them. And I think YouTube, just by its sheer magnitude and the fact that it can be experimental, could afford doing something like this, where it gives more reasons to creators to invest in its format. And so, and the last one would be a doubling down as well on, so minimizing this, right? Co-opting or really doing something around short formats, doubling down on that so that we minimize our weaknesses. I can list the pros and cons here, talk a bit more about how each is good or not, but I think just capturing the risks would be interesting for now, because it will capture a bunch of these cons. I do think the risk is that there is such a thing as YouTube addiction. I think that's an obvious one. There's a kind of a Me Too type of thing where YouTube is doing exactly the same thing as others and not appearing as innovative, and that's why this one, like tokenization, would be an amazing thing to invest in, to truly be an innovator and a pioneer in the field, and just capture a whole new kind of creator really in this field. a few other things when it comes to intelligent programming is that it's a very hard problem to solve. Netflix has, you know, a bunch of sections that they suggest to people and recommendations, and it still didn't, you know, get it completely right. So there is like a whole new team and a big investment to do there when it comes to intelligent programming. And if I were to measure success for all of this, I would go back to what we defined initially, meaning engagement and depth of engagement with time spent and number of playlists and all that for users, and really are they adopting all these intelligent programs we create for them? And then for creators, whether they are creating more videos and how often they're being remunerated, right? So are they making more revenue? Yeah, I think this actually captures, so if I were to, you know, get down to what is the final recommendation, so it's not one where, you know, it's just like very black and white. It is a multi-part plan where we need to do a few things. So one, it's to leverage our ML models and our Google, just call it roughly Google intelligence, and also all the video data we have to date to create intelligent programming. What this allows us is basically to pull in viewers and extend basically the use cases of YouTube for different kinds of watch experiences, right? So it's not only basically the 3 minutes to 15 minutes. We're really going into like the 1 hour, which YouTube, the YouTube videos and YouTube watches, you know, buying a video on YouTube today, like a movie is trying to do, but also the much shorter one. And then on the other side, for creators, like new types of incentives and community creation. Yeah, so new types of monetization, really. And then lastly, short format. I do think it's still a gap. There are stories, you know, story formats on YouTube, but when it comes to short format, I would almost like want to pause for a second and think about like buy versus build. Like, should we buy something, you know, a completely new kind of or an app that has done short format very well and somehow integrated into YouTube, one where creators are investing a lot of time, or should we build it ourselves? We've tried to build it ourselves. It's not that successful, and so I would want to consider buying some kind of company that is a social company was maybe a budding starting social graph that is doing short format very well. And with that, I think I've captured, you know, the big lines of what my positioning of YouTube would be against Snapchat and Instagram.
I'm curious to know if you wanted to think more from an execution perspective. What are, like, how would, for example, would you go about executing item number 2, like developing new types of incentives and community creation? Given that YouTube is trying to be accessible to everyone from all around the world. So yeah, I'm curious to know how that like kind of value capture model could potentially work.
Yeah, that's a great question. Thank you. Let me take a second. I do have a hint of an answer. So the way I would want to go about this, this would be a product or a feature that would have to touch several aspects of YouTube itself. And I am thinking about this along the lines of what Reddit has created for its own coin. If we are to incentivize creators in some way with either their own token or a kind of token, maybe it could be backed by the value of a YouTube token of sorts. And here's what I mean by that. The way this could roll out is that users could each have, for instance, from one day to another, we could start in a single country that we know it has some kind of literacy around all of that. So maybe one US city, or maybe, you know, a single small country where we know there are some network effects, and introduce a coin of sorts. So let's call it the YouTube coin, right? So this is again like execution here. And that YouTube coin, you know, each user, each viewer would basically get somewhere around 50 coins. And what these 50 coins basically do is that you are incentivized in some way. So if you comment, right, and if your comments are upvoted, you get more coins. And if your comments are downvoted, then you get less coins, right? And in case you want to appeal, obviously our integrity teams could come in, etc. But slowly, what this would mean is that that would introduce the value of that coin, that there is value in the work I put into the platform, and this could eventually actually reduce our own operation cost, because we're not reviewing every comment. There's kind of this, incentive for people to comment better and be good actors on our platform rather than post any hate comments. Slowly, by creating these coins, then YouTube coin could become a currency of sort that can be gifted to creators, right? For instance, or creators could even fundraise some of these for some of these coins, and these coins could then be exchanged for actual value through YouTube, right? And so YouTube would basically remunerate creators for a coin like that. Again, the way I would set this up is a single country with relatively strong network effects that we've seen before. I would base this, make sure that that's based in data and that we've seen these network effects before. I would keep it limited. I think we'd need somewhere around, once this is built and launched, at least a month, 1 to 2 months to actually see the results, whether this is moving metrics. The way I would measure an experiment like this is, from a success perspective, I would look at, again, time spent, but more like all of these metrics I just mentioned, like, are people spending these coins, right? Or giving these coins to creators? How engaged are creators with these new features? Are they asking their community for these coins or not? So is this currency really working for YouTube, and is it affecting our main metrics well or not?
Got it. Thank you so much for that. This was really great. Really appreciate it. I'm going to give you some quick feedback. I really like the structure of your presentation. I thought it was really good. You started off by really taking a step back and first of all highlighting what are some of the assumptions based on which you're going to be evaluating YouTube against Snapchat and Instagram. You talked about the framework that you have in mind that you're going to use to really come up with a recommendation. And then you confidently made assumptions while confirming with me that those assumptions are okay. And I think that was really good because it shows that you're decisive. And at the same time, it shows that you're respectful and mindful of the person who's interviewing you and their perspectives. And then you came up with a really good analysis of like pros and cons of each of these platforms that are out there, came up with a good set of ideas. And you were really thinking big, like you were not thinking about small ideas, which is one of those things that's really important for us to keep in mind when we're thinking about product strategy questions. Like the interviewer is not asking like, to improve things like 10% or 20%. They're thinking like 3 years, 5 years, 10 years down the road, where do you think we should be making like really, really significant bets? And I think you had a really good way of thinking about it. And at the end, I liked your idea. I think it's a very interesting way of like kind of suggesting that we enable the contributors to the ecosystem to capture some of that value based on basically the size of the value that they're contributing to the network, which is really interesting. I think, to be honest, overall, the answer was great. I'll definitely invite you for the next round, and I'd be very impressed. The one thing that I would have potentially asked at the beginning is asking maybe the interviewers some questions around like, how far ahead are we thinking about, or like, do we have any particular objectives or priorities in mind? That might have like potentially given like some directions in terms of like, are we thinking about it like 3 or 5 years down the road? I think you thought about it much longer, which is fine. But perhaps you might have like wanted to kind of communicate and say that I'm not thinking about like, very short term. I'm thinking like very, very long term. What is like kind of the big thing that we want to do to set ourselves up for success? But overall, thank you so much. This was really great. I invite all the community members who are watching the video to actually share their feedback right below in this YouTube video and post your comment, and we'll try to engage with it and give you guys all answers. And if you haven't liked this video yet, please like it. I think it was a really good learning experience for all of us. And at the end, I just want to ask you, Halim, From your perspective, like how would you recommend people to go about preparing for their PM interviews? Like what are your thoughts on the best ways to prep for an interview?
What has worked for me is to follow a course like yours, Bijan. It's helped me because there was a course, there was an incentive to continue showing up and just click on that complete button and have like a green check mark and just continue going. And it almost gave me a list of the things I needed to complete, where I was at. And then once, as I was doing that, I saw the gaps in my preparation and what I needed to double down on. And then I went into forums or searched on other websites for similar questions to practice even more on. And in my mocks, I focused on these questions where I felt I wasn't good enough yet. So it takes a level of discipline that a course like yours actually helps a lot with, and two, a level of self-reflection on where do I still need more preparation. Yeah.
Well, thank you so much. Really appreciate it, and we're really glad to have you here. And I think it's very impressive that during your 2 to 4 months of interview prep, you actually got 3 job offers from 3 top tech companies: Stripe, Google, Open Door. All 3 of them great tech companies in the Bay Area. So congratulations to you. We're very excited to have you as a coach in our platform as well. And again, thank you so much for watching these videos. For all of you that are watching, please subscribe to our channel, and hope to see you soon again. Bye.